As the Kremlin continues to push the narrative that the collapse of Ukraine is inevitable, the reality on the battlefield tells a very different story. Russia isn't storming through Ukraine. It's suffering for every inch of territory that it gains. At the current rate of advance, Russia would need to churn through 1.5 million of its soldiers to take Donetsk, and would need 183 years to occupy all of Ukraine. Forget about winning, Putin. It looks like it's time to start working on a cryogenic chamber so you live to see the day of a Russian victory that you claim is inevitable. First, we head to Donetsk. Long coveted by Putin, Donetsk has been at the center of the fighting ever since Russia's leader launched his invasion of Ukraine. Now, Putin is acting as though 2026 is the year that Donetsk will fall. His spring offensive is focusing on the fortress belt of cities that stand in Russia's way of taking the Donetsk Oblast. Russia is even so confident in its inevitable victory that it has issued an order for Ukraine to withdraw all of its troops from the Donbass, of which Donetsk is a part, by the end of May. If you only paid attention to what Russia is trying to do, you might buy into Putin's narrative that Donetsk is set to fall. But behind the bravado lurks a dark secret. Donetsk is so far away from falling that it will cost Russia an entire army, or even several, just to take the region. Speaking at the Security Council meeting on April 20th, Ukraine's permanent representative to the UN, Andriy Melnik, revealed the truth that Putin is so desperate to hide in Donetsk. As Putin calls for Ukraine to withdraw and cede, he is losing soldiers at a staggering rate, and he will have to lose many more before he captures Donetsk by force. According to this brutal logic of war, in order to seize the whole territory of the Donetsk region by military means, Mr. Putin would have to send at least another 1.5 million soldiers to their deaths, Melnik told the council. He added that Russia's claims that Ukraine should withdraw from Donetsk are ludicrous, where there remains about 6,000 square kilometers of territory in that region that Ukraine still holds. Those 6,000 kilometers are home to hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian civilians, and any call for Ukraine to cede would amount to surrendering these innocent people to a barbaric Russian regime that wants to destroy everything that Ukraine holds dear. The numbers are shocking, but does the maths bear out? Based on Melnik's figures, it does, and the worst of it for Russia is that 1.5 million may even be an underestimate. We'll explain how in a moment. First, let's use Melnik's numbers. Ukraine's UN representative reached his 1.5 million figure using a simple equation. There are about 6,000 square kilometers of Donetsk left for Russia to occupy. Right now, Melnik says, Russia is losing soldiers at a rate of 254 for every square kilometer that it captures. Multiply 6,000 by 254 and you get 1.524 million casualties. If anything, Melnik has underestimated Russia's Donetsk losses. An extra 24,000 casualties is nothing to sneeze at, even if Russia has been happily sacrificing more than that number of Russian lives every single month in Ukraine for years. But here's where things get much worse for Putin. As devastating as 254 losses for every square kilometer gained sounds, the actual number in Donetsk may be higher. That's according to an April 15th report by RBC Ukraine, which quoted Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov. "We are making every meter of Ukrainian land extremely costly for the enemy," Fedorov claimed, adding, "Russia is now losing 254 soldiers for every square kilometer. In the Donetsk region, the enemy loses on average 428 soldiers per square kilometer." Did you notice something about that quote? 254 soldiers for every square kilometers is the average for all of Ukraine. In Donetsk, the figure is much higher. 428 are dying for each square kilometer gained, and that has a drastic effect on the figures that Melnik shared with the UN. If Ukraine can maintain that rate of attrition for as long as it takes for Putin to capture Donetsk, then the Russian casualty rate for taking the oblast won't be 1.5 million, it will be 2.568 million. Another million or more bodies added to the list, all sacrificed at the altar of Putin's tunnel vision in Donetsk. Somehow, what would clearly already have been a catastrophe for Russia in Donetsk could be even worse than it seems on the surface. Regional averages have done a real number on Putin's claims that Ukraine should cede Donetsk. If you need a little more context for all of this, even the best-case scenario here means that Russia more than doubles its casualty rate for the Ukraine war so far. Between when Putin launched his full-scale invasion and April 22nd, Ukraine says that Russia has lost over 1.32 million soldiers. If Fedorov's figures are correct, we'll see close to a tripling of Russia's casualty rate by the time that Donetsk falls. Let's stick with the approximate doubling of Russia's casualties for a moment. Does that mean that Russia is going to need another 4 years on top of all the deaths to take Donetsk? Not necessarily. What we're not accounting for, if we look at the doubling of Russia's casualties alone, is that Russia's progress through Ukraine has slowed to an absolute crawl over the last 4 years. Making that problem even worse is that Ukraine is inflicting a higher casualty rate per square kilometer than ever before. To demonstrate that, we can look at what Russia achieved in 2025. According to the BBC, Russia managed to grab 4,700 square kilometers of Ukraine in 2025. The commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Alexander Syrskyi, says that Russia lost almost 420,000 soldiers to make those gains. Some more simple math tells us that this works out at a casualty rate of 89.3 per square kilometer. The rate in Donetsk is anywhere between triple and 5 times as high as that. So what we see from this is that it's not really about Russia slowing down to a complete crawl in Donetsk, to the point where it will take 4 more years to capture the region. Don't get us wrong, there's a slowdown and it feeds into the massive Donetsk problem that Putin now has on his hands. But what's really happening here is that Russia is losing more soldiers per square kilometer than it has at any other point in the war. If Russia keeps on pushing in Donetsk, and there is no sign that Putin will stop if he doesn't get the so-called diplomatic solution that he wants, it will likely take Russia until the end of 2027 and perhaps into 2028 to finally topple Putin's biggest target, per the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW. So not quite 4 years. It's about 2 years plus at least 1.5 million casualties to take a portion of Ukraine that is only 1,300 square kilometers larger than what Russia took in all of 2025. Not exactly good maths for Putin. What all of these numbers reveals is that Putin has a major Donetsk conundrum on his hands, and he's getting desperate to solve it without being forced to follow through on his threats to take Donetsk by force. There's also what all of these numbers say for Putin's ambition to take the rest of Ukraine to consider. But before we dig deeper into all of that, you are watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this comes from, so make sure you are subscribed if you're getting value from the channel. So, Donetsk. It's a bit of a problem for Putin. Desperation is setting in for Russia's leader, which is why we are seeing the demands that Ukraine cede Donetsk and the Donbass region intensify. These demands are nothing new. They've been part of Putin's maximalist demands for a peace treaty ever since negotiations began, and they've also been the major sticking point that has prevented negotiations from getting over the line for peace to be declared. But now there's something a little more hurried and anxious about Putin's demands for Ukraine to withdraw from Donetsk. Melnik revealed why in his speech to the UN Security Council meeting, as he said, "At present, Russia does not control more than 20% of the Donetsk region, territory which Mr. Putin has been demanding in the form of an ultimatum that Ukraine surrender without a fight. This is pure blackmail." Ukraine's UN ambassador also made an interesting point about what Russia's current casualty rate really means. He points to the winter war between the Soviet Union and Finland that raged between 1939 and 40 as an example. That war saw the Soviet Union absorb a casualty rate that was roughly 100 times lower per square kilometer gained, and that fight was still a failure for the Soviet Union, as it only managed to gain about 9% of Finland through the signing of a treaty. Now Russia is demanding a higher percentage despite losing many more soldiers than it did in Finland. Something doesn't add up here. Putin is trying to make the pressure that Russia is exerting in Donetsk pay off in a diplomatic settlement that, for want of better terms, will deliver Putin far more than his strategic ineptitude has earned during the battle for the region. And there's a big reason why. Putin knows that if he isn't able to cajole Ukraine into ceding Donetsk and the Donbass via a peace treaty, then Russia will have to fight for these regions. And despite all of his bluster and the deadlines that Putin puts in place, fighting for Donetsk is the last thing that Russia wants to do, as Donetsk is home to something so fearsome that it's already ruining Russian soldiers at a rate that we haven't seen up to this point in the war: the Fortress Belt. Perhaps the most dangerous region in all of Ukraine stands before Putin and the taking of Donetsk, and it's this belt that is already proving responsible for the massive casualty rate per square kilometer that we now see in the region. The ISW outlines the sheer scale of the challenge that faces Russia in trying to capture the Fortress Belt. Spanning about 50 kilometers of defenses running north to south along the H20 Konstantinivka-Sloviansk highway, the Fortress Belt is made up of several cities that had a combined pre-war population of 380,000. Gives you some context as to the size of these cities. For over a decade, Ukraine has focused on building up the defenses in these cities, which is a process that it accelerated to an immense degree as it held up Russia in other regions of Donetsk. Now the Fortress Belt is the sort of barrier that leads to a massive churn for any army that attempts to take it by land. The population density alone in such a relatively small space indicates a level of urban development that Russian soldiers haven't yet encountered. That means a lot of buildings for Ukraine's defenders to use against Russia. It also means a lot of buildings that Russian soldiers have to take to occupy Donetsk. Urban warfare is slow and dangerous work at the best of times, and it's made even more lethal when the invading army has to capture several cities all in close proximity to one another. Throw Ukraine's fortifications into the mix, along with the fact that the fortress belt lies on elevated terrain, and Russia has a very literal uphill task on its hands if it's going to take Donetsk by force. Bear in mind that the fortress belt is far from the place where Ukraine would make a last stand. That term may apply in Donetsk, but as Russia throws cannon fodder at the fortress belt, the time needed to topple Ukraine's defenses is all time that Ukraine can use to reinforce fortifications further west. Even if the fortress belt eventually falls, any ambition that Putin has for using this victory as a springboard to take the rest of Ukraine would collapse as soon as his soldiers look beyond Donetsk and find that more of the same awaits them deeper in Ukraine. The fortress belt is tearing through Russian soldiers as we speak, and those soldiers have barely even made a dent. Not that you'd know if you listened to Russia. Russia's Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, made some interesting claims mid-April. He says that Russian troops have managed to capture over 1,700 square kilometers of Ukraine, along with 80 settlements so far in 2026. March and April have seen Russia take 700 square kilometers and 34 settlements as part of the spring offensive that is primarily focusing on Donetsk. These figures are designed to be just about believable enough to create the illusion that Russia is making some forward progress in Donetsk and elsewhere in Ukraine. Without being so large, they can be dismissed out of hand based on the speed of Russian progression so far in the Ukraine invasion. But notice that we said designed. According to the ISW, over 1,700 square kilometers of Ukraine taken in 2026 is a massive overestimate. The less charitable would say that it is a complete fabrication. An ISW analysis suggests that even the most generous estimate claimed that Russia had only managed to occupy no more than 715 square kilometers since the beginning of the year. The odds are that the number is actually much lower. ISW's own count, which is compiled using open-source data, suggests that Russia has only managed to take 381.5 square kilometers of Ukraine and 13 settlements so far in 2026. There are also losses, almost 60 square kilometers of them alone in March, which shows us that Russia's already glacial rate of progress is also being made worse by Ukrainian counterattacks. We don't know if Putin is seeing any of these numbers. But then even the massaged figures likely being delivered to him by people like Gerasimov are enough to create desperation inside the Kremlin. Thus, the reason for Russia being so insistent that Ukraine hands over Donetsk is revealed. This isn't about Russia making demands from a position of power. Putin and his cronies see the slow rate of progress and the enormous casualties being absorbed to make that progress, and they're doing whatever they can to avoid having to take Donetsk by force, even though they're threatening to do just that. This is basically Putin telling Ukraine to give up a fight that Ukraine is winning. And the desperation in Russia's leader is already starting to show. Seeing that Ukraine has no intention of handing over Donetsk, Putin is making grand vows that Russia will keep fighting, all as he begs Russia's oligarchs for cash to help his cause. That's according to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which reported on April 1st that Putin used a March meeting with some of Russia's business elites to ask Russia's richest to pitch in. Those business owners shouldn't be tempted into spending their profits on their businesses, Putin reportedly said. They should be making donations to the state budget that is funding the war. Crazily, the pitch apparently worked. Suleiman Karimov, who is a prominent oligarch, supposedly handed over $1.23 billion. Other oligarchs also agreed to contribute. But let's call this what it is. Putin is going around with his cap in his hand because his war against Ukraine has driven Russia to the edge of bankruptcy. Oh, and there's another deadline in the Donbass. Russia now plans to have captured the region by September, according to the deputy head of Ukraine's main directorate of intelligence, Vadim Skibitsky. We mean Russia can claim that as much as it wants. All of the numbers we've revealed in this video mean that we could politely call this latest deadline a pipe dream. If we're being less polite, Putin must be off his rocker. Now, there's one more bit of maths that we can do to show you just how fruitless Putin's campaign for Ukraine is going to end up being for Russia. If we expand the scope of Russia's invasion beyond the Donetsk region, Russia still has about 80% of Ukraine left to capture. Despite Putin's claims that Russia would stop at the Donbass if Ukraine cedes the territory, it's obvious that Putin wants the whole country. He isn't going to stop until he gets it. Actually, he is going to stop. He'll have to. Putin will be far too dead to see a future where Russia controls Ukraine if the war keeps on going the way it is right now. Melnik points that out. He says that for Russia to take all of Ukraine while absorbing its current casualty rate, it will need 183 years and 122 million people to make it happen. We can do some math to see if Melnik is right, at least on the casualty count front. According to GIS Geography, Ukraine is Europe's second largest country, and it spans 603,628 square kilometers. As of March 4th, Russia held 19.4% of that territory, and as you saw earlier, hasn't exactly been making fast progress since. Based on this, we can say that Russia holds almost 111,104 square kilometers of Ukraine, which is a figure that includes the Crimean Peninsula that Russia illegally annexed back in 2014. Take what Russia holds away from what Ukraine has, and you get 486,524 square kilometers of Ukraine left to occupy. Multiply that by 254, and you don't get 122 million casualties before Russia claims Ukraine, you get 123.57. This is an insane number, and it seems almost too obvious to point out that Russia could never sustain this. But then there are 183 years to consider. Putin, you are already 73. We don't know what you think you know about the average human lifespan, but we're pretty confident you're not going to be around in 183 years. You could live over 2 lifetimes on top of the one you've already lived, and Russia still wouldn't control Ukraine at its current rate of progress. Putin should forget about winning. Donetsk is showing Putin anything is that he should pull Russia out of this war while he still can. If he doesn't, he'll be long dead without having seen any real progress, and whoever comes next will have to deal with running a country that is consumed by the sheer scale of sacrifice that Putin has demanded. And by the way, Ukraine is slowing Russia down even more by taking territory in remarkable counterattacks. The active defense strategy that we're seeing in the fortress belt has been extremely successful in Ukraine's south, as the country has liberated a massive amount of territory. Find out more in our video, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show to see more analysis of the numbers that lie behind the Ukraine war. And thank you as always for watching.